Another foot and you'll reach China. Better dig 2 graves. Reeves, one for your greens and one for your pride.
The shovel bit into frozen earth with a crack that echoed through Christopher's jaw. He didn't look up.
He's right. This is madness. But I promised her.
Wasting good land on a hole full of glass. Come spring, you'll have a frozen pond and a pile of broken windows.
The town had called it a glass hole for weeks. Aldridge just wanted to see a man break over his own foolishness.
When the snow melts, Harold, you'll remember this hole.
Remember it. I'll bring flowers to your wake.
The laughter faded into the wind, and for a long moment, Christopher stood still, staring at the earth that held nothing but frozen roots.
She would have believed in this. She always saw green where others saw dirt.
By nightfall, the pit was chest deep. Christopher lowered himself into it like a second grave, but in his mind, it was already a sanctuary. The next morning, Christopher walked the frozen road into town with Rusty at his heels, the sky threatening the year's first heavy snow.
Well, look who's come to buy a coffin. You'll need one for those seeds, Reeves.
Inside Potter's general store, the shelves were almost bare. Those who gathered turned to watch the entertainment.
I need winter kale seeds and 24 feet of timber. Put it on my account, Potter.
Timber. You are building a church in that pit now? Or just a monument to your stubbornness?
The storekeeper slid the seeds across the counter without meeting his eyes. Someone behind him chuckled. Outside, the first flakes fell. Christopher tucked the seeds into his coat and shouldered the lumber, the laughter trailing him like smoke. He turned off the main road at the small plot where Clara lay. The wooden cross was already half swallowed by frost.
She died in March, her gums bleeding, her body hollow. The doctor said it was scurvy. There wasn't a green thing in the valley to give her. I'll make it grow, Clara, even under the snow. I promise.
By morning, Christopher stood at the pit's edge, the lumber stacked beside him. The second grave was taking shape, but it would be a living one.
The frame would need glass, more than I could buy. But the old Bethel church has stood empty for 2 years. Those windows still have panes.
At the derelict church, he pried loose 36 panes, each one cold as a tombstone. The splintered frames fought him, but he packed every clear piece into the wagon. Back on his land, the glass panes lay stacked like frozen water. He unloaded them piece by piece, the sound of their clinking the only music for miles. That night, by lantern light, he opened the worn book he'd found in a trader's trunk. Agricultural Methods of the High Andes. The Incans had grown food under glassed pits for centuries.
52 degrees. The angle must match the winter sun's lowest path. If I get this wrong, the glass will only reflect shadow.
For 3 days he cut and notched the timbers alone. Rusty watched from the rim, tail wagging only when Christopher spoke to himself, cursing, calculating, never doubting. On the 4th afternoon, he set the first pane. The glass slanted southward, catching a weak sun and throwing a pale square of light onto the frozen dirt below.
There. That's the sun's angle, just like the book said.
By week's end, the glass roof stretched over the pit like a frozen pond tilted toward the sky. From the ridge, it looked like a strange window buried in the earth, a glass hole waiting inside the pit. Christopher pressed kale seeds into the cold earth. Rusty whined from the rim.
If the angle is right, the glass will trap enough sun to fool the seeds.
By dusk, snow fell. He stood watching flakes melt on the glass, the air inside still.
You'll be eating icicles by Christmas, Reeves. That glass grave won't save a seed.
He brushed snow from the glass, clearing every inch to let the light in. That night, the thermometer read 45. Outside, the world froze at 10.
To Clara, this would have been a miracle. To me, it's just the proof I needed.
For a moment, a small smile cracked his wind-burned face. 3 days later, Tiny shoots broke the soil, thin as spider silk, but green.
They're alive. If these few survive, no one in this valley will go hungry in March again.
The cold snap killed a third of the seedlings overnight. Their tiny leaves were blackened by frost that had crept through a mist seam.
One gap I overlooked. That's all the cold needed to reach them.
He spent the next day packing straw into every corner, stuffing burlap into the eaves and heaping snow against the outer walls.
The book says Earth stays warm below frost. If I sleep there, I'll know the instant the cold wins.
That evening, he dragged a cot into the greenhouse. Rusty followed, curling at its foot like a living heater.
Rusty figured it out first. He's been sleeping here for 2 nights already.
The first night he woke to silence. His breath did not fog. The earth's warmth held the frost at bay.
40 degrees. The dirt itself is warming this hole. It's not a greenhouse anymore. It's a sanctuary.
By morning, the remaining seedlings stood unshaken, pale stems reaching for the wan sunlight through the glass.
I'll stay. Every night until the harvest. She would have done the same.
2 days later, the larder was bare. Christopher trudged back to Potter's store through snow that now reached his knees.
Look, it's the farmer who buried his pride. How's your dirt garden, Reeves? Growing anything besides mud?
A few men grinned. The store smelled of coffee and desperation.
Just a sack of oats.
Oats? Should have planted those instead of glass. The way folks are talking, scurvy's spreading faster than your foolishness.
Christopher's hand tightened on the counter. He'd heard the whisper as Mrs. Aldridge was down with it.
He doesn't know his own wife may need what I can't give yet.
He paid without a word, the sack of oats feeling like a stone in his arms. Rusty fell in behind him as he left. Back inside the greenhouse, the plants were reaching higher, but not fast enough. Every green leaf was a promise he couldn't yet cash.
They're still too small. If I strip them now, I save none. Hold on, Clara. Hold on, Clara. Hold on.
Past midnight, a seam in the glass cracked open. Snow sifted down like salt, settling on the kale leaves. He climbed the ladder with a bucket of frozen mud and a strip of burlap. The cold bit through his gloves.
The Incans used clay and wool. I've got mud and rags. It'll hold, or it won't.
He worked by lantern, the book open beside him. Rusty lay close, his warmth a small mercy. The page showed a sunken pit cross-section, earth radiating warmth to glass. Stable temperature, underlined. By the time the last gap was sealed, his fingers were bleeding. But the snow had stopped its slow invasion.
You are not a hole, are you? You are a heartbeat. Something Clara would have touched and smiled over.
Dawn broke. The glass roof was clean, the temperature holding at 42.
I'll guard this place like she guarded us. No cold, no hunger, no goodbye.
He sat with the book, Rusty's head on his knee, and let the quiet of growing things fill him. The weeks ground on. Christopher cleared snow from the roof until his back screamed and his shoulders knotted. His hands split open in a dozen cracks. He wrapped them in rags each morning and worked through the sting. One dusk, through the glass, he saw a neighbor's boy, thin as a stick, ribs pressed against his coat, staring at the green. The child never knocked. He just stared, then melted back into the snow. Christopher did not call to him.
What if this is all folly? What if that boy starves because I hoard my pride?
That night, he knelt clutching Clara's photograph. The earth was warm, but the glass felt cold.
Was I wrong, Clara? Is this just another grave?
He slept poorly. At dawn, a speck of green caught the light, a new kale leaf, unfolding like a tiny hand. It was no bigger than a coin, but it was alive.
One more leaf is enough. We go on.
Word spread like frost. A blizzard was coming, worse than any in living memory. The north ridge had vanished behind a wall of black cloud. Christopher dropped his shovel and stared. 3 days, the old-timers said. 3 days of wind that would skin a man alive. He moved without hurry, driving stakes, lashing ropes, packing snow. The greenhouse had to become a fortress. Every blanket, every crumb of food, every drop of water went inside. Rusty followed, tail tucked. At dusk, he sealed the door. The glass roof was already trembling, a low hum like a plucked wire. The first gust hit sideways, snow plastering the panes. Rusty whimpered beneath the cot. The temperature inside dropped 2 degrees.
It's just wind. Wind can't break earth. The Incans knew that. Hold.
For 2 hours, the greenhouse shuddered like a ship in a gale. The lantern flickered. The plants bowed and straightened, bowed and straightened. Christopher lay flat on the cot, hands pressed to the earth, feeling for the cold that would signal a crack. But the dirt was still warm. Outside, the blizzard screamed. Inside, the air was still. He did not sleep. He waited, counting the beats of the wind. By the second day, time had blurred into a long gray hum. He ate a handful of oats and watched the kale leaves tremble under each gust. He held Clara's photograph to the lantern, tracing the outline of her smile. The glass felt warm against his cracked thumb.
It held, Clara. The wind couldn't reach us. Even the cold feels different in here, like a guest that's learned to sit still.
On the third morning, the roar fell away to a whisper. The glass was a sheet of white. Snow had buried the roof. He dug upward with his bare hands, clawing through the packed drift until a sliver of gray light cut through. When he climbed out, the world was erased. Smooth drifts where fences had been. Silence where wind had screamed. But the greenhouse was whole. Inside, the thermometer read 41. The lettuce stood unbowed, each leaf a tiny green fist. He sank to his knees in the dirt and wept, not for the cold, not for the hunger, but for the thing he had built that refused to die.
This isn't just a garden. It's the warmest room I own, and Clara is still in it.
4 days after the blizzard, Christopher broke a path to town. The road was a memory under new snow, and the air tasted of ashes. The valley lay white and silent. No smoke rose from half the chimneys. Hunger had a face now. He passed Aldridge's cabin. Through a frost-caked window, 2 thin faces stared at a cold stove. One child coughed. Aldridge did not come out at Mrs. Weaver's door. He paused. Her voice drifted out, cracking with exhaustion.
Anything green, please? The boy's gums are bleeding now.
He didn't knock. He backed away, the boy's pale face burning into his memory. In his mind, Clara's voice echoed, the same plea he'd heard 2 winters ago. He walked back to the greenhouse with empty arms. The kale was still too small, tiny leaves that would vanish in a single meal.
If I pull them now, all this work means nothing. But that boy...
He stared at Clara's photograph, then at the seedlings. The silence of the greenhouse was heavier than the snow outside. He set the photograph down and reached for the watering can. The waiting continued, though it felt like a sin. A second squall blew in before dusk, wet and heavy. An old pine branch snapped under the weight and crashed onto the glass. A pane shattered. Icy wind poured through the hole, like water through a burst dam. The temperature inside plunged 7 degrees. Christopher was already running a fever. His cough had rattled for 2 days. He climbed the ladder anyway, hands shaking.
The mud's frozen. The rags are stiff as wood. This one might beat me.
He pressed the broken pane with strips of ice-crusted burlap, working until his vision blurred. Rusty whined below. When his legs gave, he fell onto the cot, too cold to feel the blankets. The dog climbed up and pressed against his chest. Through the night, Rusty did not move. His body was a furnace against the fever. The wind still screamed, but the patched hole held. Dawn. His eyes opened to green. The lettuce had not frozen. The kale stood backlit by a weak sun. He was alive.
Even my own body tried to quit. But Rusty, he stayed. They're both still here.
He did not rise. He lay watching the glass until the sun climbed high enough to warm his face. He forced himself upright 2 days later. The fever had left his legs like water, but he needed to know who still had breath in the valley. Inside Potter's store, Aldridge stood apart from the few men. His hands were raw, his eyes shadowed. He did not laugh.
She wouldn't let me come, my wife. But the children, I am asking straight. Is there anything green in that glass hole of yours?
They're not ready, but her gums are bleeding, just like Clara's.
For a long moment, he was still. Then his hand left the counter and reached into his coat. He pulled out a worn leather pouch, blackened with age, the last of the rosehips he'd gathered before the first freeze.
No greens yet, but these might hold the scurvy off a few days. Take them.
Aldridge took the pouch. He didn't speak. His hand trembled, from cold or shame. Impossible to tell. Back in the greenhouse, he opened his journal and wrote in a shaking hand. The 20th of January. Held. Gave rose hips. Carrots still need 2 weeks. He sat among the tomato vines, the earth's warmth pressing up. Outside, snow began again, but inside, the green kept breathing. For the first time, he wasn't fighting alone. Aldridge came to the greenhouse the next afternoon. The offer was already written on his face before he spoke.
I'll buy the whole thing, Reeves. The glass, the seeds, the book. Name your price. I can sell the greens to the valley.
Christopher didn't look up from the lettuce. His hands kept moving through the soil.
It's not for sale, Harold. It was never about profit.
Then you'll let my children starve? I'll tell everyone you are hoarding food in this glass hole while people die.
The words hung like frost. Rusty pressed against Christopher's leg, a low growl building.
When it's ready, everyone will eat, not before. I won't gut the future for a few days' relief.
Aldridge stared, his fists clenched. For a breath, something unspoken passed between them. The weight of a wife's grave, a child's hunger.
You are a fool, Reeves. But I'll be back when you bury yourself in your own stubbornness.
Christopher turned back to the tomatoes, his jaw tight. The only sound was the soft rustle of green leaves under glass. The town meeting was packed. Rationing had failed. Talk turned to prayers. Christopher stood at the back. When he stepped forward, the room quieted. The man with the glass hole. Few had ever heard him speak.
I have a greenhouse dug into the earth. It isn't dead. Greens are growing under glass, even now.
A man coughed a laugh. A woman leaned forward. Hope, thin as snowmelt, crept through the room.
Growing? In solid winter? You expect us to believe that?
I expect nothing, but in 2 weeks I'll bring proof. Until then, hold on.
He left the hall with only Rusty. A few followed him with their eyes, hope like kindling in a dark wood. Inside the greenhouse, he knelt. The lettuce heads were firming, a leaf the size of his palm, crisp with life. The waiting was nearly over.
Not yet, but soon.
The last storm came screaming down from the high peaks before February turned. It buried the glass with a weight that made the rafters groan.
If the glass breaks now, it all ends.
For 5 hours, he swung the shovel without stopping, his legs buckling, Rusty dragging snow aside with frantic paws. When his arms gave out, he slid into the greenhouse and collapsed on the cot, Rusty's warmth pressed against his frost-bitten cheeks. At dawn, a knife of sunlight cut through the last drift. He crawled to the lettuce bed and saw them, heads as big as his 2 fists, crisp and green. Not a single leaf was lost. The kale stood taller, The carrots had thickened underground. The glass had held.
They're ready. After all of it, they're ready.
He sank to his knees among the tomatoes, laughing and crying, the sound lost inside the earth that had saved him. Rusty nudged his hand, and he pulled the dog close, the two of them sealed inside the green sanctuary that the blizzard could not reach.
Clara, we made it.
He pulled the first carrot from the soil, orange as embers, dirt clinging to its skin.
For all the cold and waiting, it's just a carrot, but it's mine.
He washed it in a bucket, bit into it raw. The crunch echoed, sweet and sharp.
It tastes like spring, like what Clara used to grow in her little kitchen pot.
He gathered a small basket, lettuce, kale, 2 carrots. Rusty whined, and he tossed a carrot top. That night he slept deeper than any night since Clara died. No dreams, no cold reaching through the blankets. Morning. He filled 3 large baskets to the brim, enough for the whole valley, it seemed. The glass had held, the earth had warmed, and now the green was his to share. He stood at the door, baskets at his feet, Rusty waiting for his signal.
Time to prove them wrong, old friend.
He cut a path to Mrs. Weaver's, the basket of greens cradled against his chest like the most fragile cargo. He knocked twice. The door opened a crack, and Agnes Weaver's thin face peered out, pale and wary of another disappointment, after so many promises broken.
Mr. Reeves, what is it? What do you have there? More promises.
He raised the basket into the gray light. Lettuce, kale, carrots, green life, where only gray had been, a still life of impossible hope, the first harvest from a hole they'd called a grave.
Oh, mercy. Greens, real greens. The boy, he'll live.
Take it. There's more where this came from, and I'll bring it next week.
She fumbled for coins, pressing a few into his palm. He closed her fingers over them, accepting only the smallest currency of dignity.
I won't take charity. Please, let me pay.
By evening, all 3 baskets were empty, his pockets heavy with coins. Word had spread down the snowy street, and neighbors came knocking, desperate for a taste of life. He sat on the greenhouse steps that night, Rusty beside him, looking at the first stars. Something had shifted. The valley now knew his name. Before dawn, Aldridge stood at the greenhouse door, hat in hand. No sneer, no bluster, just a man who'd run out of pride.
Reeves, I was wrong. My wife, she's eating again. Show me how to build one, please.
Come in. The book's on the table. Bring your shovel.
At the work table, Christopher unrolled the Incan diagram, his finger tracing the sun angle. Aldridge leaned in, silent, learning. By noon, they were digging together, 2 shovels in frozen earth. Other neighbors watched, then fetched their own tools. 1 pit became 3. 3 became 6. The sound of shovels rang across the valley like a bell. Christopher stood in the cold, teaching the angle of the winter sun, the depth below frost, the old secret from the Andes. By late February, 5 glass roofs tilted toward the low sun. Children carried baskets of greens home.
Took a fool's errand to save us all. Your Clara, she'd be proud.
The hole they laughed at is feeding the valley. Maybe now I can let the rest of it rest.
A sealed letter arrived with the spring mail, heavy paper, a university crest. The professor had heard of Midwinter greens pushing through the snow. He wanted to come see for himself. Your use of sunken pit construction echoes Incan techniques predating the conquest by 3 centuries. I would like to document your design.
They knew it in the Andes, Harold. For hundreds of years. I just dug the first one in this valley.
A college man, coming here, for a hole in the ground.
Christopher rolled out the old diagram again. This time, surrounded by farmers, they traced the lines with calloused fingers, seeing for the first time the ancient intelligence that had whispered to him in the cold. The town hall filled again. not for rationing, but for a feast. Women brought bread, men carried salted meat, and center table held a basket of fresh greens from Christopher's sanctuary.
Last winter I buried a grandson. This winter, he's running again. Because of that glass hole.
It wasn't just me. Clara planted the first seed in my mind. I only buried it deep enough to grow.
Later, alone in the greenhouse, he touched Clara's photograph. The glass was warm. He could almost feel her hand on his. The ridicule was a memory. The hunger was a solved problem. His name was being written into something larger than a single valley. Snowmelt ran silver down the glass. He picked a lettuce head and set off toward the ridge. At Clara's grave, the bare cross stood in sun. He laid the green at its base like an offering.
We did it, Clara. No one goes hungry this March.
He knelt, tracing her name. The sun warmed his back. A bird called.
Not a grave. A door. She was on the other side.
Crocuses bloomed at the greenhouse edge, purple against the snow. Spring had come. He stood. 5 glass roofs caught the sun across the valley, each a small world of green. The ridicule was a ghost. The hunger was a solved thing. Only the green remained. He walked down the slope, lighter than he'd been in 2 years. A man and his dog, walking into spring, having turned a hole into a sanctuary. Christopher Reeves never set out to change the world. He only wanted to keep a promise to a woman who loved green things. But from a hole in the ground, he pulled a second spring for an entire valley. The glass hole that townsfolk mocked became the warmest room in the territory. What seemed like foolishness was ancient knowledge. The Incan sun trap reborn beneath a northern sky. He was simply the first in the valley, willing to look foolish enough to dig one. The ridicule faded. The hunger ended, and in the warm earth beneath the snow, a widow's grief bloomed into food for 100 tables. Christopher stood at the door, Rusty at his side, watching the sun sink behind the glass. He had built a sanctuary, not just from cold, but from despair. And beneath the snow, the green kept growing.